This is our top story, though, this morning. The inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal. This is described as the worst ever NHS treatment disaster is beginning today. It's going to look at how patients were given infected blood products during the 1970s and the 1980s, and also how the authorities responded. And, importantly, they're going to be looking into whether there was any kind of cover-up. Thousands of people with haemophilia and other bleeding disorders are believed to have been infected with HIV and hepatitis viruses over a period of more than 20 years, and about 2,500 of them have since died. Collette Wintle from Martley in Worcestershire was infected with hepatitis B and C during surgery as a teenager and has since developed cirrhosis of the liver. Our reporter, Kalpana Badu, has been along to have a chat with her.
For me, it began as a 17-year-old. I went into hospital to have a routine tonsillectomy. Unfortunately, I bled post-operatively, and I was given a substantial amount of what I now know to be blood products that were imported from the United States of America.
So when was it you first realised, you're a normal 17-year-old living your life? At what point then did you realise, OK, things aren't right here?
I think what I did know was that I never felt physically normal again, even after I eventually recovered from being in hospital for a month and finally getting over that tonsillectomy. But I never felt physically the same. Interestingly, my mother had a comment made to her as I was being discharged from hospital by the doctor who'd been treating me, and his comment to her was, "Your daughter will never be the same again." She didn't challenge him on that and regretted it deeply for years afterwards. But I think that he knew that I had been exposed to dangerous blood products and that what the outcome would be. But certainly, when you've been exposed multiple times, that impact on your immune system and the impact on your body, you start to get very clear signs that are classic to people with hepatitis C. You get muscle ache, you get a foggy brain, you feel nauseous, you feel sick, and the fatigue is phenomenally bad. And it makes it impossible just to do normal things and live life normally, which is actually what happened in the end. Was I could no longer continue to work, and I was retired from my last employer, who ironically was the NHS, at the age of 38. And from that point, my condition has deteriorated year on year, and subsequently I developed cirrhosis of the liver. I'm being scanned every 6 months now for liver cancer.
How different was your life to your peers, to other young women that you must have been friends with at the time? Your lives must have suddenly started going in completely different directions.
As an adult, as a young woman, yes, of course, I saw my peers grow up and go off and go to uni or college or develop careers. I tried, as I said, I trained to be a nurse, but I never completed my training because I was exposed to hepatitis B, and they couldn't wait to get rid of me and wouldn't let me come back and retrain and finish my training. And people were moving on and developing their lives and their careers and enjoying their health, and all of that was taken away from me.
It's awful, isn't it, Collette Wintle? Your life being completely turned upside down, cirrhosis of the liver through kind of, no fault of your own. The government already announced extra money would go to these people affected, annual payments for some of those infected, substantially increasing from a total of 46 million to 75 million pounds. But the inquiry starts today. Jason Evans is the founder of Factor 8, that's the independent haemophilia group, as a core participant of this inquiry. Jason, morning to you. Tell us briefly what happened to you. What's been the effect of this for you?
Yes, good morning. Well, I actually lost my father to this. He, like Collette, had haemophilia, and in the 70s and 80s began to use these Factor 8 concentrate products, which were derived from the fact that the pharmaceutical companies became involved in something which was previously voluntary. And my father was infected with hepatitis C and HIV through products from the then subsidiary companies of the likes of Bayer, Baxter and Revlon Healthcare, and he died in 1993 as a result of those infections when I was 4 years old.
What was it like, just knowing that your father had these things through no fault of his own?
Well, it was very, as I say, I was 4 years old at the time of his death, and my memories really revolve around his funeral and him dying, so that not very great memories, if I'm perfectly honest. And I began campaigning for a public inquiry alongside many others in 2015, and I think today marks the start of people like myself and the victims themselves being able to tell, in full those stories.
What do you want from this? Do you want compensation? Do you want an apology? Do you want someone to be held accountable? What exactly are you after?
Well, I think the minute this campaign changed was when it became not about me. I mean, as for the Department of Health's announcement today, if their 2016 report figures are to be believed, this increase today amounts to about £900 per victim. So it's almost laughable, really. I don't think anyone's going to be remotely moved by that. But I think ultimately what we want, when I got started in this, we wanted to put it on the record that there was wrongdoing here and that it was totally avoidable. 1,500 confirmed deaths in the haemophilia community from Factor VIII, and they were avoidable, and I hope this inquiry will show that.
Okay, Jason, good to speak to you. Thank you ever so much. Jason Evans, the founder of Factor VIII. We'll follow this. We'll have more on this throughout the programme this morning. But yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? It's something that you've got, you go and get treatment for it, and you just presume, don't you, that everything is going to be okay, because that's how you go to the doctor, they diagnose what you've got, they give you treatment for it, and you think, okay, fine, lovely, and you probably don't presume that they've got it wrong. Or something that is being given to you is arguably doing you more harm than good.
It could become some kind of sentence for you, really.
Yeah.
Well, the NHS Blood and Transplant Service has been asked to be a core participant in the inquiry to ensure they are completely transparent. The service says it will work closely with the inquiry team to ensure they have access to all the information they need to ensure truth and closure to those who have been so tragically affected by this issue.
Yeah, it's something we've followed a lot. We've talked to quite a few of these people before, haven't we? And today, big day for them. So obviously we'll follow it more throughout the programme. Your thoughts as well, please do, especially if you've been affected by anything like that, get in touch. Let us know. 81333 on the text with HW at the start of your text message. Our top story this morning, victims of the contaminated blood scandal in England will receive more money. The government's announced ahead of a public inquiry which is beginning today. The inquiry will hear from around 120 people, including some from Worcestershire, and we'll look at how NHS patients were given infected blood products during the 1970s and the 1980s.
Thousands of people with haemophilia and other bleeding disorders are believed to have been infected with HIV and hepatitis viruses over a period of more than 20 years. About 2,500 of them have since died. Collette Wintle from Martley was infected with hepatitis B and C during surgery when she was a teenager and has since developed cirrhosis of the liver. She'll be giving evidence at the inquiry next month.
It will be emotionally trying. And there's no question. And there is a part of me that dreads having to go through this again to talk about what's happened in my private life and how it's affected my family life and how it's affected my relationships and my time with my daughter that's been stolen from me as well. And my health ultimately, has been ruined. I just feel that it's important that I carry on this mission until I do get the truth out. I don't want to go to my grave with any regrets that I didn't do to help others, because there are, let's not forget, many people who are still stigmatised as well by these conditions and aren't able to speak out publicly. I felt I had no choice. The only way I was going to get people to be made aware of this tragedy was to speak about it.
Andy Evans from Evesham contracted hepatitis C and HIV when he was 5 years old. He's the chair and the co-founder of the Tainted Blood campaign group, and I spoke to him earlier on about how this has affected his life.
I didn't find out that until I was about 12 or 13. My parents told me. They'd known since I was about 10. And we subsequently found out that the doctors had known for a good time before that without telling us. So you can imagine, as a sort of 12, 13-year-old being told that you've got HIV, it's a bit of a surreal experience. At that age, as a teenager, you feel a little bit invincible. I think I made some sort of flippant comment to my parents that I would become a researcher or a doctor and cure myself, so they didn't need to worry. But you could see my mum drove me out into the countryside and stopped in a little country lane and sort of sat in front of a field watching the sheep, and it was weird. We sat there for a little while, and I wondered what we were doing there. This was unusual behaviour, and then she came out with it, and you could see the tears welling up in her eyes. And as a parent, that I am now, I can't imagine having to tell my kids, that kind of news, and that she'd lived with that for a good couple of years beforehand, and kept it to herself.
And what's it like living with a condition like that, Andy? How does it affect your day-to-day life?
Well, shortly after that, I developed full-blown AIDS. They put me onto a medication called AZT, which was experimental, and they gave extremely high doses of it, and that itself made me quite ill and quite possibly tipped me over to full-blown AIDS. So by the age of 16, I was in hospital pretty much all of the time until proper medications came out when I was 20. But you can imagine, really, that those are formative years, aren't they? They're the ones where you move on to adulthood with your friends and become an adult.
Well, and there's still no cure, is there? So you still presumably day to day have to deal with this and live with this.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I've been on medications now since I was 13 years old. I'm now 42, and you can imagine that the long-term side effects of all of that accumulate. I've suffered quite badly with side effects from the medications. I've had a stroke. I've had avascular necrosis of the femoral heads, which means the hip bones crumble away. So I've had to have 2 hip replacements. And just the day-to-day things like the nausea and the fatigue, and just it's not a life that anyone would choose, really.
And all this from contaminated blood products, and this is what the campaign's been for, isn't it? This is what your group's been fighting for. What obviously today, big day, the inquiry starts. What do you want to come out of this?
I mean, we've been fighting for an inquiry for such a long time now. I mean, the campaign itself is getting on for 30 years old. Tainted Blood itself was set up in 2006, and our aims were briefly to fight for a public inquiry, to get an apology for the both the treatment, contamination, and the way that we've been treated since by subsequent governments, and third of all, to get the proper support and compensation that people need to continue to live whatever lives they've got left. So what I'm hopeful for this inquiry is that it will uncover the truth, that we will get to the stage where people feel that they can finally draw a line under this as much as possible with all the health conditions that we have, and get on with actually living a life 30 years on.
It's Andy Evans from Easton. He's the chair of the Tainted Blood Campaign Group. He contracted hepatitis C and HIV after a blood transfusion. Imagine that. Imagine living with that, having that and going on to develop full-blown AIDS as well. Through no fault of your own.
That's not when you're so young as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Change your life, wouldn't it? And it has done.
Well, the government said extra money would go to thousands of people affected by the medical catastrophe, including bereaved partners of victims, with annual payments for some of those infected substantially increasing from a total of £46 million to £75 million. The NHS Blood and Transplant Service has been asked to be a core participant in the inquiry to ensure they are completely transparent. The service says it will work closely with the inquiry team to ensure they have access to all the information they need to ensure truth and closure to those who've been so tragically affected by this issue.
Yeah, we'll obviously follow this story because this is, we've heard from a lot of these people a few times before. It's a case we've followed. We'll follow it through. But yeah, big day today, and we'll keep you across it all here. The first UK-wide inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal, described as the worst NHS treatment disaster ever, has begun hearing from those affected today. It could take up to 2 years, and we'll hear from around 120 people. Some of those from Worcestershire looking at how NHS patients were given infected blood products during the 70s and 80s. Some 4,800 people with the disorder haemophilia were infected with hepatitis C or HIV. More than 2,000 are thought to have died. It's being led by retired Judge Brian Langstaff.
We have already requested a number of documents which we would not have got had this not been a statutory inquiry. It is willing to hold people to account where appropriate, and it will express its views at the end without fear or favour, affection or ill will.
Well, Andy Evans from Evesham contracted hepatitis C and HIV when he was 5 years old. He is the chair and co-founder of the Tainted Blood campaign group. Good afternoon.
Hi, Andrew. How are you doing?
Well, thank you. How's it felt for you today for all this to finally get underway?
It's been an emotional day. We've heard from, obviously, Brian Langstaff himself, QC Jenny Richards, but then three of the most powerful testimonies I've ever heard in my life from actual victims of the campaign. People who've been affected by HIV and hepatitis C and various ways it's affected them.
Yeah, you're one of them. How's it impacted your life? Remind us.
It's touched every part of my life, really. It's been a long 30 years campaigning, so that's been a big part of it. But also, you know, having developed HIV and hepatitis C when I was 5 years old, it's something that I've always known. I was told when I was 12 that I was HIV positive. My parents told me. It was a secret I had to keep because of the stigma that was surrounding HIV back in the day, with the falling tombstone adverts, for one thing. And we were just told to keep it a secret. And it was something that people who were dirty contracted. And so we were lumped in with all of those people, and that was life. But then along came the illnesses. And so, you know, by age 16, I was diagnosed as having full-blown AIDS. I was told that I was going to die within short order. There were no medications to speak of at that time, and it was a case of just waiting to die or waiting for something to come along, some sort of miracle, which thankfully it did.
Yeah, I was going to say, because here you are. How is your health now?
It's okay at the moment. It's an adventure every day living with HIV that you've had for more than 30 years. Because we're at the forefront. There's nobody alive who has had HIV longer than haemophiliacs, and so there's no route map planned out for us. You know, you've got the side effects of the treatments that we've had over the last 20 years since they've been available to take into account, and you just don't know what's around the corner.
And I guess, I mean, God, we want you to be here for a very long time, as I'm sure you do and your family and friends.
You're very kind, thank you.
Well, we've not met in person, but you sound like a nice guy, and so let's focus on that. But at the bare minimum, you, I'm sure, want to see out this inquiry, don't you?
I certainly do. It's been 30 years too late. It's come 30 years too late for so many people that have died. Let's talk about the HIV-infected people alone. 1,200 people were infected with HIV in the early 80s. Only 200 are left alive now. So in many ways, I'm a very lucky person. But, you know, so many weren't, and we have to be their voices now.
Well, look, I'm sure we'll talk over the next couple of years. Thank you for your time and for telling your story so well. Andy Evans from Evesham, chair of the Tainted Blood campaign group, co-founder too, who is, along with many others, fighting for justice in what has been described as the worst NHS treatment disaster ever.